Hello friends, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat, and with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Prayed for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. The seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other world. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Hey, shalom, and welcome everyone to another Ask Me Anything monthly session with researcher, speaker, and author Gary Wayne. This is your host, Lisa George. We've received a bunch of questions during last month's show that Gary will be answering today. And if you have a question for Gary, please join the live chat and put it in all caps so that we can see them. My niece, Tree Frog, in the chat will be helping me again today to retrieve questions so we don't miss any. Thank you so much, Tree Frog. And thank you to our awesome moderators as well for their help today. I wanted to make mention that Justin put in the chat a little bit earlier that an update of Zen, who is finally getting out of the ICU. He's in the process of moving to a rehab now where he can get focused help for regaining normalcy. And they thank everyone for your prayers. So continued prayers for Zen. Brother Gary, are you there today? How are you doing? And please share any updates and contact information with our listeners.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me back. And so happy to be here again tonight. And so only updates I have tonight would be to update people where I am on the audio versions for book 1 and book 2. So I received an email this afternoon that said the producers are 3/4 of the way through book 1, so not quite on target for the end of June as previously anticipated, but would expect that July would be released with only 25% more to go. I've reselected and chosen to continue with the reader for book 1 to book 2. And as soon as they're done producing book 1, they're going to move on for book 2 and hopefully have that out September, worst case October. So all of that's going to be available on Amazon through Amazon ACX. And once that is available, I will get a link up on my website that takes you right to Amazon ACX as well. So at the Genesis6conspiracy.com, that's the Genesis 6, the number 6 conspiracy.com. So busily approving the chapters as they come in. I'm running a little bit behind where they are, but I'll catch up over the next week and make sure I don't hold up the project and get the audio version out there.
Running behind, Gary, are you? It sounds like you must be pretty busy. I can imagine you must be running behind with all these things going on. My goodness.
Yeah, and for people who are emailing me and asking for information and stuff like that, be patient. I'll get to you. I am running behind on the emails as well. So
I don't know how you
but
keep up,
I did
Gary.
get to them. I did some more today. So
oh my goodness,
yeah,
I
they
was
keep
joking.
coming in, which is good.
Okay, great. I was joking. I can't even imagine how you can keep up with everything. That's why I said, oh my goodness, you're running behind. I can imagine. It's just crazy time. And just to let you know, I am on, chapter am I on? Chapter 34 now of your awesome new book. And I highly recommend everyone who has not bought a copy of this book, you've got to get it. Every serious researcher needs to get a copy of this book. I actually used your book to teach I think you might have seen the video, Gary, on unicorns a couple weeks ago. My husband and I did a show, and I used your chapter in unicorns to help me bring forth the research that you've done on that, and added some of our own in there. And it's every single chapter. It's just like I like how you did this book as well as the first book, where it kind of builds, and it especially this chapter, it really helps to clarify all the different giant tribes in the Bible and where they came from and who their patriarchs are. And I mean, we get a lot of information in the Bible about the godly patriarchs, but we get like, you know, the Table of Nations and kind of verses here and there about the other who are living in the land of Canaan during the time of the Israelites. And I really appreciate that, Gary.
Yeah, you know, I think you know, the whole book is essential reading for Christians, but for sure, if you want to understand the Old Testament, the first three sections are just so valuable to just start to be able to put together all of that information into sort of different files in your mind as you're reading through the first three sections. And, you know, even section 4 and 5, I mean, you know, once you get into the giant nations and labeled, and then into the giant wars, everything just starting to sort of piece together as you walk through the Old Testament, as you walk through book 1. So let alone how all of that intersects with end time prophecy. But it's a unique book, and I think it's one of the more unique book that you know is on the market. Just as you know, book 1 is unique, this is unique in different ways. It's like book 1 on steroids for Christians. And if people are familiar with Dr. Heiser's work, I think it's like Dr. Heiser on steroids.
Oh, it truly is. It truly is. My husband and I are thoroughly enjoying your work. And speaking of that, we should better get into the questions, because we have several questions left over from last time that we were not able to get to. So we're going to forward those questions to start out with today. Are you ready, Gary?
I certainly am.
Okay, great. I'm going to go into the first question then from TPS Wave 39. In your opinion, were there a race of human beings who were around before Adam and Eve?
Yeah, I think there is a couple of races sort of at a minimum that might have been around before Adam and Eve. So most people look at Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, and Genesis 2 as being just additional information added on to Genesis 1, and particularly with the Adamites as they connect into the people of humans in day 6. The issue gets to be not that that's not a common thing that's done in the Bible. It is. It's one of those patterns that the Bible continually adds more information. But the distinction would be is that the additional information that's provided on other topics is never in conflict with the original narrative and the original details. And the Bible doesn't function that way. So when you take a deep dive on Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, the first thing you note that people say, well, even if it was a little bit later, that's day 8. Well, it doesn't say day 8 either. There's only 7 days, and then sometime later you get sort of Adam and Eve. But the differences are just too wide-ranging and too common. And for me, I struggle if there would be one conflict, let alone, you know, multiple. I mean, way more than 10. And I have a couple of documents that I have for people if they want to get a hold of me, and I take it right back to the Hebrew and lay out all of the differences, and just show that there has to be 2 different creations of the people of day 6 to the Eden account. Otherwise, the Bible is in conflict. And then for me, that just cannot be possible. So the only solution would be is that there's 2 different creations, and the Adamites are created sometime later. We're not told how long later, sometime after day 7. And at a point when there's a need to create the Adamites, I think, in relationship with the angelic rebellion and the pantheon of the gods, which has led the people from day 6 astray. And Adam is created by Jehovah, who is introduced to us in Genesis 2, where we get Elohim, the Holy Spirit. Elohim in that particular application would be understood singularly in superlative as for the God, as opposed to all 3, because the Holy Spirit is shown distinctly in Genesis 1-2, hovering over the waters of chaos. And also you have Jehovah there, but not sort of explicitly said. So, and I use that sort of tongue in cheek. And what I mean by that, it says when God said, when Elohim Amar, Amar is the word of God. So, and that's Jehovah. So when we see the word logos of God, Theos, in the New Testament, it is the Greek version of the Old Testament version where we get that distinction coming in Genesis 2:4, where it says Elohim, the Lord God, which means Jehovah of the Elohim. And so if we understand that when God speaks, that's the word. And that's why we get that explanation to understand the distinctions and how they work together and in perfect harmony. And so God would be El Elyon, or the single version of El in the capital superlative sense as well. So so El Elyon, the Father, Abba, that's the one who's speaking, and when he speaks, that's the word. And so that's when we get introduced to Jehovah, and he breathes a special spirit into Adam. And that doesn't happen in day 6. And so you have humans made in multiple numbers, both male and female at the same time, and told to spread around and to cover the earth and to colonize the earth. Well, Adam is born in singular. He's put in Eden. Sometime later, Eve is created, so not at the same time, and from Adam, which isn't explained at all. And that would also mean by the number of races that we see that there would be in day 6, all the races being created at that same time. Adam is part of the same species. Adam and man are the same series of words. Adam has a distinction for its Hebrew designation, but it's part of the same source of words. And so he's the same species. He may be one of those 4 races created on day 6. He may be the 4th race with 3 created, but somehow, some way, we have 4 races, and Adam is of the same species. And you have all sorts of things being talked about in terms of the order of the creation, and you get to the point where you just say it just cannot be the same story. So I detail that in these documents if you get a hold of me through my website. And then I do it in a couple of ways. I do the day 6 versus Eden document, and then I talk about Adam the first man, ? And add some more information in on that. And I also provide a comparative of the scripture in a chart kind of form where it goes through side by side. You see the differences, just so it's a little bit more visual. So if you get a hold of me, I'll send you those. It's going to take me a couple months to get them out to you, but be patient and I'll get them out to you. And it also starts to make some sense as to who does Cain marry when he's ostracized. And if we look at that story, we don't know how long Adam and Eve are in Eden, but by the details, the fall happens fairly quickly. And the fall is caused by this strange creature, the serpent Nahash, that's introduced to us in Genesis 3:1. And it is a beast of the field, which is kind of interesting. And so the beasts of the field and other beasts are created in day 6 as well, but before the humans. And if we reference 2 Peter 3, we see that a day is 1,000 years for humankind, paraphrasing, or a day of God is like 1,000 years for humans. And so it would seem that the Nahash would have been created, if that's the case, and I think it is, in terms of the days of creation. And one of the reasons why we get 2 Peter 3, it also has some other interesting relationships in Genesis 1 that I won't go into tonight, but it's such an enlightening passage as it connects the end time fire for the time of Jesus is coming, and when they're saying, when is his coming? And so you could have had a creation of these Nahash beings that were up to 1,000 years before the day 6 humans, and that these were serpentine intelligent beings, walking, talking, intelligent. And the word Nahash has a source word Nahash that basically describes them as sorcerers and necromancers and words like that. So a priest-like, and they were considered in Gnosticism to be like the royal, the highest of the beings. So we have two groups of beings created before the Adamites in that sort of scenario, and that once the Adamites are created, they're going to lose that position, and they're the preferred beings of the Nash, or the preferred beings of the Seraphim Watcher angels, who are also serpent-faced. And so I don't know whether or not they had anything to do with the creation of the Nahash, or they just sort of adopted them in because of how they look, but they seem to have been used to help lead the people of day 6 astray, and Adam is a new start and the answer to the angelic rebellion, because the fallen angels have convicted themselves again in Genesis 1 in this line of thought. And then the fall in Eden, they convict themselves again, where Satan is involved with the Nahash to bring Adam and Eve down. So, and as we look at when Cain is ostracized, we don't know how long they're in Eden, as I said before I got on that rabbit trail. You have probably maximum 20 to 40 years, because it just doesn't seem all that long. And then you have Adam and Eve bearing Cain and Abel, almost immediately by the time frame as you look at it after leaving Eden. And in adulthood, in old Israelite law, it starts at young adulthood at 20 and goes to 40. So at some point in that adulthood, somewhere between 20 and 40, you would do as your adult obligations is you would start doing your first fruit offerings to God, whether you're raising crops or you're raising animals. And Cain doesn't take the first fruits, whereas Abel does, which is why Abel's offering was accepted and Jesus's wasn't. And we see that in the first fruits in the Israelite feasts and celebrations and worship of God. So it's a standard that works all the way through. And so Cain would have been 20 to 40 years old. So let's say it was 40 years in Eden, 40 years at the ultimate side of doing the offerings. That puts him at 80. Well, Seth is born when Adam is 130 years. So on that side, you still have 50 years before Seth is going to be born. And then sometime after that, you have daughters born to Adam and more sons. And up to another, I would say, 68 based on Deuteronomy 32, which is the 70 sons for the nations and the table of nations before the flood that passage is talking about. But we're not told who all of those sons are. And so it's unlikely that when Cain goes to Nod, and it's already named Nod, and if there's nobody there, there'd be nobody to name it. So you'd have to say it was past written, but it's not saying that. It's going to a place seemingly already named Nod, and it's east of Eden, and it's in Sumeria, and it is a place where he is going to find a wife, where there should be no wife, and he's going to build a city for seemingly no people, other than the fact that there is people because he finds a wife. So it starts to take care of, when you understand Genesis 1:1 and 2 as two separate creations, it takes care of other conflicts downstream as well.
Wow. Thank you so much for that detailed answer, Gary. That's amazing. Let's go on to the next one from Viveka Amato. Could the last generation be understood as the last age?
Well, some people understand it that way. I would say you couldn't apply that word as in the last days or the end of this age. But to me, it's from a biblical sort of chronology, not quite right. I would, you could look at the millennium as a separate age of 1,000 years, and this was the age of the Adamites, and Jesus is the new Adam when he comes. So you could look at it from that perspective. But the millennium and the creation of Adam and the creation in days 1 through 6 of the earth, whether it's renewed or it's the first creation, seems to be one epoch. And if this was a renewal of the earth, there would have been an epoch before day 1 and between Genesis 1:1 and 2, and seemingly that destruction by fire that 2 Peter 3 that a reference is talking about, where the world would have been destroyed down to its foundations and then renewed, just as the Holy Spirit does so in Psalms 104 and another accounting of creation. So that would have been an age 2. And so, but when we're talking about the end of the age, we generally are talking about the epoch of Adam and everything associated with that. And so the end of the age is kind of understood as the end time, when all things are going to be fulfilled and the King of Righteousness comes in and all vision and prophecy is fulfilled and sin is eliminated, which is the part of the 70 weeks that's talked about in Daniel 9. But certainly it's not like the world is destroyed and it just moves forward for another 1,000 years. Now, maybe that's another age as you would look at it from an eschatological perspective. And then you have another age after the millennium, after the judgment of the dead and the final resurrection. And you have a new heaven and a new earth that is being created. And so that would be certainly another age. So I would say it's fine to say that the end time is the end of the age and the end of this age, but you ought not to be too absolute on that, would be my opinion.
All right. Great answer. Thank you, Gary. Let's go on to Brian Tucker has a question about, does King Oberon control all elementals? Who controls the dogmen? I know you've discussed this before. I'm very intrigued with this question.
Yeah, it's so elementals, and we're told about the elementals in the New Testament as in a couple of passages. It might some of them translations also might say rudiments. It all goes back to the same Greek word, element or rudiment, and it's understood in 2 different ways. One is the basic elements of the universe, which the application that's used in that is pretty clear. But when the elements are part of what is enslaving us, as the New Testament talks about a couple of times, then these are beings that are part of the visible ones that are answerable to the invisible ones and part of the whole overall kind of hierarchy of the rebellious ones. And so King Oberon is mentioned in Midsummer's Night Dream. And in this Shakespearean play, you have all sorts of fairies and things that are going on in it. And King Oberon is called the King of the Fairies. Now, there's several different allegories that are layered in there. So you could look at that as one of the elementals, and the elementals has 4 groups. 3 little ones, and then one that's a salamander or reptilian, which is larger than humans and very much akin to what the Nahash would have been, which was the size of a camel, according to the Gnostics, so taller than humans, but not giant-like, or the ones that are taller than humans that are sort of equated with inner Earth and the alien mythos, whether that's the Nahash that were saved by fallen angels to live in the earth and or into another dimension, or it's a different type of being. It's not clear, but it is a Nephilim-like being. It's just not as large, just as the elementals are Nephilim-like. They're offspring of the fallen angels, and there may be some DNA manipulation that goes along with that. So Oberon is married to Titania, which is the queen. Titania is the female word for Titan, or the Tanu, as I talk about in the New Testament. And so she's the queen of the Titans by the name and the title. So the question gets to be then is Shakespeare talking about elementals with Oberon, or is he talking about the Tuatha De Danann, which is the the fair folk, the fairy folk, and giants, and all connected back to the tribe of Danu and the Datanu and the Titans. And if you understand the transliteration of words between languages, you could have a D pronounced as a T. So in Titan, you could have that as the Dan, which is a word that's used for people in the Bible. And Datanu is equivalent to Dadan in Hebrew in the Old Semitic. And so that's Ditanu, and seemingly an association with that as it's coming out of the Ugaritic text to Anu, just as the Tuatha De Dan or the Tuatha Danu. And many other names as well, but just to keep it sort of simple. And so you could have that spelled as Tutis, Tatanu. And you drop the suffix and you have Titan. And I think Derek Gilbert does a very good job of explaining that T to D transliteration, and I talk about it in book 2 as well. But it's a common understanding and it helps you. But anyways, so you could have a double entendre allegory that's going on there, and there could be other multiple allegories. So you could have it talking about giants, just as the king of the giant of the Tuatha De Danann, just and it would be like the same type of thing that goes on in the Grail tales with King Arthur, who is son of Uther Pendragon, Tuatha De Danann, king. And also you have Guinevere, which is the fairy queen, and basically that means like a banshee or a spirit, and words like that the meaning of Guinevere is. And so Oberon is also associated with the word Uber, as in Germany, as in, we have Uber rides, so as being sort of great or large, or Overon or Overreign, where Overlord comes from, and Uper, as it's in Scythian, and so they're all the same words for the rulers or the kings of these giants, and that definitely there's a giant allegory in there with Oberon, but because they're talking about fairies, I think there's a double entendre there, and Shakespeare is referring back to the elementals. And as I say, in the little people, you have ugly ones, you have mischievous ones like leprechauns, and you have good-looking ones. And it's the same standard for the elementals all around the world. And each of the 4, because you have the salamanders as well, will represent a specific physical element in the world: air, fire, earth, and water. And so typically the fairy folk are represented as an Oberon, king of the fairies, in the ugly group, which includes the hobbits, and which includes the dwarves, and also includes the gnomes that looked after the genealogies and the technology and have flying UFOs, UAPs, and do kidnapping of people, and they come through portal dolmens. And in book 1, I give a couple abductions by these gray fairies, and you'd swear it was a gray alien abduction because it's identical. So that's part of that sort of hierarchy. And I'm not saying this is gospel by any stretch of the imagination, but in my research, I came up with a name for the particular group here, and of these ugly ones that represent Earth, and his name would be Goob, Ghube, which would be the king, whether or not that is connected somehow to Oberon or not. So the salamanders would be Nixa, would be the name of that one, and air would be Peralda, and fire is Djinn. And Djinn, if it sounds familiar, that's the same word as jinn that comes out of the Qur'an, so some sort of demonic type of being in spirit, as well as they make the name. So I can't say that Oberon is Goob in this case, or it might be just a Goob. It could be, you pronounce that. I'm not sure what language that comes out of. But would not be unexpected that Shakespeare, who utilized a lot of occult knowledge, if it was indeed Shakespeare or not, but probably more likely Bacon, or at least Bacon being the source of the information, then I think there's more going on there than just with the giants. And so with the dog people, again, we don't really get a definitive king of the dog people. We do get Anubis, which is a jackal god, who created dog people en masse and created Sinoopolis, which is Greek for dog city, where his offspring lived. And then we have Nebaz, who's an Avim god, and that means a barking god was depicted with a dog or a jackal's head in the worship in Mesopotamia by the Avim. And the Avim were in the Covenant land. They also had a location in the Mesopotamian region like the Amalekim, where they were worshiping different kinds of gods than they were in the Covenant land. So we have some other things that we can trace that back to. We have Latin Khan, Khan, which is an interesting title of kings and bloodlines that comes out of India and also associated with Scythians and with the Mongolians. And it basically is a Tartar title, and Tartars again were part of the Scythians. In Britain we have a Ku Nobilim, which was a king, and Ku means dog. So I think when we look at all the information that's out there at dog men and Nephilim, I think they're Nephilim, and they're warriors or mercenaries. We have a large settlement of them as they're created in North Africa. We have another large group in India. We have two large pockets in China, one on an island, one in the mainland, and in that tradition also created by watchers as well. It's part of the Tengu group of watchers. But we don't have one specific king. So it's kind of like it's suggesting there's multiple creations and lines and bloodlines of these dog Nephilim. So you have to do a little bit of connect the dots and speculation. But Magnus Conus is another name that sort of surfaces in some of the research that I did on dog people. And I couldn't really do anything with it other than, that's the great dog people, so to speak, to do the translation of the words. So I can't say I have a specific name. We have certain kings that are associated with the dog Nephilim, but not a specific king or one king. So I think there's multiple lines, and they're described a little bit differently in different parts of the world too, not quite identical. So there's some distinctions there.
Well, thank you, Gary. I was taking notes like crazy while you were talking, and I'm glad that you made that link for those of the listeners who don't realize that Shakespeare is actually kind of like a stage name, I guess you could say, for Bacon. And it seems like people in the chat are aware of that, but thank you for bringing that forth. Also, I love your link with Uber. I put in the chat, think of Oberon the next time you decide to take Uber somewhere. And I love all the links. Also, that word, I noticed you've been doing a lot of word studies, especially in your new book, and all the notes at the bottom of each page are just so valuable. I noticed that when you mentioned Guinevere, I think that's modern day would be Jennifer. Is that correct? Jennifer?
Yeah, you could. Yes, because the G can be sounded as a Y, as in George or Jorge, with a J and a G, and particularly as you get also not only from Spanish, but into the Eastern Slavic languages. And so that could have been spelt with a J as well to get the same sort of balls as we have J for Iesus, which we pronounce Jesus, and the J is introduced with the Baconian language. That goes into the New Testament, which is why you have Jehovah going back to Jehovah, but they don't do it. I think they do Jehovah 4 times, and then the rest is Lord. But the Hebrew word is Jehovah in the more modern translation of Yahweh, as the W changes to a V. So it's that in that sort of line of evolutionary pronunciations and letters.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I also was giggling a little bit how you label the ugly ones, but if you look at movies like how they're depicted in Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, for example, they truly are like the ugly ones. But thank you for that answer. Let's go on to the next one from Connie Marmal. Did God return to the second temple after it was built?
It's a really good question. So typically, you have the jewels on the vest, the Urim and the Thummim, and that was one way of communicating with God in the Holy of Holies. But you also had the Ark of the Covenant, which was a communication tool as well. So after the destruction of Babylon, and the destruction of the first temple, when the second temple is built, the ark is never returned, but you still have the Holy of Holies, and you still have the vests that the priests were utilized, and they would communicate. So I would say the answer is not as intimately as what would have been through the ark and in the first temple, but definitely still communicating through the high priest and the priests that were selected to be in the Holy of Holies. Yes, I would say yes.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary. And the next question is from one of our moderators, from Sherry Papin. She's asking, were white horses with horns and wings called Pegasus?
It's a really good question because it would seemingly kind of fit, except that Pegasus is never shown with a horn or ever described with a horn. And so there's something similar, but something different. And so I would say they're a little bit distinct. So the unicorn does have a single horn, and it was more of a chimera type of being, with like a horse's body, but this big single horn that could kill a elephant on the charge, and it had to be big enough to take the weight of a Nephilim before the flood or a Rephaim after the flood. And there seems to be a unicorn recreation after, whether it's through DNA manipulation or the gods recreated unicorns for the Rephaim giants after the flood. But they seem to be different in the analogy of the Pegasus. So, and you were mentioning, Lisa, I go into a fair bit on unicorns and the two different kinds of unicorns, and that in the occult, and I cover this off in book 2, but in the occult, the second unicorn is a watcher. The second unicorn is a heavenly being, and it's sort of equated in their allegories of the offspring gods after the flood. One presumes it would have been done the same way before the flood with the parent gods, but let's say with the Olympian Zeus offspring gods who overthrew the parent gods, and they're the ones that are reigning, the offspring gods reign after the flood. You have Zeus and Apollo and the other gods with their thrones, their chariots, being pulled by white horses, but the older tradition shows them with a unicorn. And this is the same sort of image as a counterfeit image, because the fallen angels counterfeit everything in heaven, just as in Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10, where you have God's chariot being pulled by cherubim, and just as the book of Psalms also accounts for that. These are thought in the occult tradition to be a cherubim, an allegory for a cherubim, and why they do that allegory, and it may be from the bull trait, but from a single horn trait, even though you have two horns of a bull, and cherubim has one face of a bull. So this would be like a single horn bull in this case, just as unicorn, as it shows up in the KJV Bible, goes back to the Hebrew word rem, which means a wild bull. And the unicorn is also shown on the Stuart coat of arms for the mighty Prince James. Gabor probably is what that word is signifying there. But, and that these are angelic beings, and he has a lion and a unicorn. And the lion is also another face of a unicorn, or a cherub, I should say. And so I think he's showing in his heraldry, the taciturn genealogies back to two important celestial mafia godfathers, the fallen angels. And so the Hanovers have dueling unicorns on their coat of arms. So I think that that's the other side, where you have these flying single-horned, or alicorn, as some people say in the modern sort of lingo, that is not the same as what the Nephilim had or the Rephaim had, and that what was pulling the chariots of the gods and the counterfeit council of the gods is rebellious cherubim, and that again, none of that is the type of being that is akin to these innocent little horses with single horns that were so playful that they didn't hear the calling of God to come to the ark. The truth of the matter is because they were DNA manipulated as, and designed as weapons of war for the riders, the Nephilim and the Rephaim after the flood. They weren't called to the ark. They were not pure physical nature or spirit. So that's why they didn't show up after the flood and why they had to be recreated. And again, you know, when you get into those great white stallions that we see that come with the Lipizan horses and traveling, that is the same sort of descendancy of these white horses that were used down upstream in the time of the Persian kings. And these were large horses. And so like Darius, for example, there would be two of these large chariots being pulled by these huge white horses. They didn't have a horn at that time in history. And he would ride in one, and the other one would be empty, that the gods would be riding in as they went into battle, and the god of war in that particular application. But as you go further back into that, and as you get in like Gargantua and other writings of the occult, that's where you see these unicorns start to go back to this very distinct animal that is not part of the natural creation.
Wow, they really know how to represent there, putting the unicorn and the lion on their seal, right? So I was laughing a little bit there because they have to put it in plain sight. It's just up to us to see what we're going to do with it, with researching their symbolism, right?
Yeah, so if you see a dragon on a coat of arms, that's a seraphim angel.
Oh my goodness.
If you see an eagle, that's another face of the cherubim watcher.
Right.
And of course, when they became physical forms, they'd only take one of those faces. It starts to make sense that is a symbol that was created, originally put on banners that they would put on a pole, and they would ride with that into other lands, and the royals in those other lands could look at that banner and know exactly where they fit in the hierarchy and who they are.
Oh, exactly. It's just amazing once you go down these rabbit trails. It's so worth it though, because it helps to understand the world today and what's going on with prophecy as well. Thank you, Gary. We're going to move into the new questions now that were submitted last month. Start with John Thomas, who's asking the 144,000 being represented as our God-given blood. Do you think that could possibly be what was meant in the Bible? Those that didn't have the third strand added are the 144,000? And no third strand reptilian?
Yeah, I'm not with the premise. There's not a passage for the 144,000 as God-given blood. I think they're very, very special people, no doubt about it, and they're going to be here for a terrific commission. So I'm not there on the first part of the premise, and that they certainly wouldn't have a third strand that would be reptilian or in any sort of form. And I'm not sure he's saying that they actually have that third strand in there, but we don't really have evidence of a third strand of DNA that I think is being suggested by John here. So where you have the dual sort of strands, it's like they show it in dueling serpents for DNA. There would be a third strand in there that I've not seen evidence that is actually out there. Doesn't mean it's not there, but I've not seen that. So, but what's interesting, what I will say is about these 144,000 is they are very, very special. And there's a couple of passages in the Old Testament. There's probably three passages. I wrote down two. Exodus 22, 28 to 29, and Numbers 18, 16 to 18. And this is a passage where God reserved all of the firstborn sons of Israel in the time of the Exodus for himself. And it doesn't say what he's going to do with these ones that are reserved for himself. Oh. And of course, the 144,000, they've not been with women at all. And my kind of deduction is that the 144,000 and the tribe of Dan is not represented there for some things that they did throughout their history and probably will do in the end time. These were selected from the original Exodus and have a relationship to preaching the gospel that Jesus talks about in Matthew 24 and Mark 13, and also in relationship to the two witnesses that are preaching the gospel and prophesying. And then the final preaching of the gospel happens just before the destruction of Babylon in Revelation 14, with the angel flying through the air, and then the end comes. And so I think they have a connection to the waking of the lost tribes in preparation for second Exodus. Just as when you see Israel being saved, they're carried on the wings of eagles. And just as in the book of Exodus, they were taken allegorically on the wings of eagles. And again, I think that's another reference to the coming time of Jacob's trouble that they're going to be saved out of, the time of Sarah, the last 3.5 years, the Great Tribulation. Sarah, trouble. Philipses, tribulation is the Greek cognate term for the Hebrew Sarah for time of Jacob's trouble. Now, what I would also say is that in Revelation 14:1, they received a seal on their foreheads, and they're also redeemed from the earth, and they're purchased because they're perfectly innocent. And they were there just for a commission, and it would seem because they're part of the first fruits, as they're called in Revelation 14, they're also martyred as part of the first fruits, just as you have first fruits in Revelation 6 that are martyred and Revelation 7. And Jesus was martyred and the first of the first fruits, so to speak, in the beginning of the resurrections. And so in that seal, it's defined, that's written on them is their father's name is written on them. So God's name is written on them, or their own father's name is written on them. Hard to know, but it's going to be something special in that seal with a name on it as it's defined. So I would say they are very, very pure from the human aspect. That's where I would sort of buy in that there's no third or reptilian strand, but I haven't seen a reptilian strand in our own DNA. So but it's certainly possible, right? If that's been mixed in. So, and certainly we have the particularly lines of the gensas, but I've not even seen the gensas, whether it's the LB gens or the Julia gens or the Creta gens or all the different gensas from specific Rephaim and Nephilim. I haven't seen anything from the Royals that shows a different type of DNA strand, but I'm not a scientist either, so.
Yes, yeah, I just finished reading your chapters about all the gens. It's very intriguing, the albigens. That's amazing information. Real quick, Gary, for the Numbers passage, what was the chapter there that you quoted? I got the verses 16 to 18. What was number? You have Exodus and Numbers, those two passages you gave us?
Yeah, Numbers 18 and Exodus
18.
22.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Next question from Brian Tucker. Ezekiel 36. How does a person receive a new spirit? Gradually or in the twinkling of an eye?
It's a really good question. So, in the passage of a twinkling of an eye, in 1 Corinthians 15:52, that is coming as part of the resurrection sequence that I talked about, and that we're going to be transformed instantaneously. Our bodies are, because in the resurrection process, we're going to receive a new body, not a new spirit, but a new body. So it's not necessarily the spirit that is transformed, but it will be helped, if I can put it that way. So when we look at a new body with the same spirit, we also need to factor in both in book of Jeremiah and 31:32, where, and again, Brian's referring to an Ezekiel reference of sort of a similar sort of nature, is that laws will be written on our hearts. I would also say minds. And so that's the Hebrew word leb, which can mean minds. And that's important to understand, because as we understand our nature, we have the spirit that comes from God, we have the soul that it merges with, and the merging of that creates the mind. And then you have the body, and the soul and the body is the oiketerion for our dwellings, our spirit that comes from heaven. And that's Jude 1:6, habitation is how it's translated from oiketerion, and house in heaven in 2 Corinthians 5:2. Now, if we merge that with the understanding of this passage and another passage in the book of Hebrews, is that we're going to have those laws written on our hearts and our mind. And so mind in that application is Dianoa, which means mind or spirit. And so it's that portion of the mind and the spirit that's going to receive the new body, that we're going to have the laws of God written on our spirit, so that we're not going to be like the fallen angels, who, even though they had that immortal spirit, still rebelled. And just as we have a spirit, a different kind of spirit, we sin, and many humans have rebelled. So this seems to be what God is going to be providing for us as we move into the future, is that additional help that's in our pure new body, that's like Jesus, that can go interdimensionally and into heaven, which can't be done except until Jesus did it first. And also the spirit is going to have that adaptation. So it's not like we're going to be brainwashed. It's that we're going to have, as part of our spiritual nature within our consciousness, this ever-present understanding of the law to help guide us in eternity. So I would phrase it that way, as opposed to a new spirit. New body, help with the spirit.
All right. Thank you. Great answer, Gary. Next question from Barbara Havens. What is the origin of baptism, and where are the instructions to do this properly?
Yeah, there's not a lot of instructions. The source is from John the Baptist, and the best place to go to, and you can read it in the other Gospels as well, but Matthew 3:10, that's where John the Baptist is baptizing, and Jesus goes to get baptized, and all he did was he took people and dunked them into the water, submerged them into the water. And in conjunction with that, there would be words that would be said to, in effect, to commit yourself or recommit yourself to God. And then after Jesus becoming flesh in the crucifixion, to be baptized in the Holy Spirit, to be baptized in with Jesus and with God. And so Jesus is represented there with that water as the water of life. And so that's sort of the pre-eternity allegory in terms of being sort of ritually or ceremonially performed. And then you have the Holy Spirit that sort of came down on Jesus at that time as well. So there's no real instructions other than it's just a dipping of the body, typically the head, into the water so that you have this sort of new start. And it doesn't have to be very, very complicated. It just has to be done in the spirit of what you're doing. And there's a submersion. And it doesn't mean just because you do it physically, you're saved. It's the spiritual aspect that's involved here. And accepting Jesus into our life as our Redeemer and accepting God and the Holy Spirit, that allows us to, sort of allegorically speaking, in the new eternity, to continue to drink the waters of life through Jesus.
All right. And that means not infants being sprinkled, right? I don't find that in the Bible anywhere. All right, next question, Gary.
And
sorry.
I understand the thought on baptizing that way, but there's not that free choice to do so. That's done, right? The baby
Yes.
doesn't have any choice at that point. So
Yes, we're at a break right now. We'll see you guys after the break. Thank you so much, Gary.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
We will not comply with the institution's sick illusion. No, it won't.
As a bookstore for truth seekers, it's our goal to make ancient manuscripts which were once held captive by secretive institutions available for public consideration. In our generation, where wisdom has increased, as Daniel the prophet foretold, we have access to many of the testimonies our early church brethren were persecuted for preserving. After being hidden for centuries, these manuscripts have been leaked from various sources throughout the earth, and it's our goal to gather these sources into printable form to make available for all who seek the ancient way. If you're looking to deepen your studies of the biblical narrative, find these ancient manuscripts and more at sacredwordpublishing.com. Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
Hello friends, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the planet. Not giving up. Revolution Radio. All right. Thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Welcome back, everyone, to our Ask Me Anything here with researcher, speaker, and author Gary Wayne. This is, again, your host, Lisa George. If you have any questions to submit, please put them in all caps in the chat so that my niece, Tree Frog, can retrieve them. And she's helping us out today. Thank you so much again for all of you being here. We're going to continue on with our next question. Brother Gary, you there?
I am.
Okay. Here is the next question. Please speak, and this is from TR1P Mong DIM3N5102, and they're asking if you could please speak about Tenochtitlan, the land of Nod, Moo, the land of Cain's descendants, now under Mexico City.
Yeah, that's an interesting sort of question. So, I mean, it says, we have to remember there's a flood and there's an antediluvian age and then there's the post-diluvian age. So if we're looking at what's being talked about that's under Mexico City, and we're talking about the land of Nod, this is before the flood. And also under Mexico City, that's the land of the Aztecs after the flood. As they connect down probably through the Quiché and a couple of the other tribes that came along and settling in from Atlantis. So as I look at the question, I wasn't sure whether or not we were talking about the time of Nimrod, but this is definitely the land of Nod. And even though they're in the same location, This is not Moo, as is being suggested there, as Nod. Nod is not the same place as Moo. So Nod is the place that Cain went after Eden, and he went east, and that was to the area in Shinar, and I think the same area that Nimrod settled in. And that Mu is one of the many multiple civilizations that was before the flood, depending on what sources you're reading. There could be 4 civilizations, there could be 7, there could be 9, there could be 11. Some people say even more. Typically 7 is more of the standard. 4 to 7 are the standard. I lean more towards 4. So Nod would have been in antediluvian Sumeria, and not in more closer to where Atlantis would have been kind of created, so to speak. Now, the area of Central America was settled in some versions by and connected to this the survivors from this empire of Mu, and that Mu is either closer in the Pacific Ocean to Central and South America, or as in some people will place it more into the Indian Ocean region, but somewhere in this Pacific Ocean. And it's thought to be part of the seeding that started the antediluvian area of the subcontinent of India and the Vedas and the things that date themselves back into that period of time. And also portions of the Atlantean Empire before the flood. That become part of the Atlantean Empire. So there seems to be almost a crossover there. And you get a lot of writings that are talked about within some of the surviving writings of the Maya and the Aztecs. And just as you have a belief in the Hinduism that religion and that post-Diluvian civilization was sponsored by the 7 sages, and also from the descendants of Mu, from whom they received their Veda scripture. So I don't place Nod in Mexico City. I place it, halfway around the world. Now, some people might say, well, the continent split. But that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because Nod is, east of the area of the Euphrates River, because Eden went to the Euphrates rivers, to the Nile, probably to Mount Hermon and to the Pacific Ocean. Now, how far he went, maybe he went further than to the Euphrates River, but you still have Sumeria that's located on the other side of the Euphrates River. If you kept going more into India, then you might be into an area of Mu again. But that would be the only connection. It would be through India, not through Mexico in my research. So I would not place Nod and Mu together.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Next question is from Will Harmond. Do you expect giants to return in the last days, as inferred to in Isaiah 13, the Septuagint, against Babylon?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't accept the Septuagint translation there. I understand how they get there, but the Hebrew doesn't quite match up to that. So I find it interesting, but I think there's more details in there. So typically it's being referred to in Isaiah 13:3, and that's the passage where it says, I have commanded my sanctified ones and also called my mighty ones. And mighty ones there is Gibor, and the male plural is Giborim. For my anger, even them that rejoice in my highness. And this is an end time prophecy. And some beings are coming. Are they giants based on Gibor, or is it something else? Gibor is used 158 times in the Old Testament, not always for the application of giants, but a lot. But it can describe a human. And David's mighty men weren't all giants. Maybe a few were that were non-Israelites, like Uriah the Hittite, or the Maccathim that was in there, and maybe a couple others, but they were humans, and they were called mighty ones as well. mighty ones of David's mighty men. So they can also be used to describe the power of God, and it's also used in conjunction with angels and their power and their strength. So we really have to sort of understand the context. And so in 13:3, it says, I've commanded my sanctified ones. And the sanctified ones are God's loyal angels. And they are the mighty ones of a specific angelic order. Now, that could be in the Greek, the dunamis, which are mighties, as they're translated into English in the New Testament, or the mighty ones in the book of Revelation could be Icarus. But I don't think these are giants, and because they're the sanctified ones. And then we even get more detail, is that in Isaiah 13:5, it says that they come from the end of heaven. Well, we don't have giants in heaven. We don't have any scripture of giants in heaven at this point in time. And then when we look at Isaiah 13:4, it's the Lord of hosts musters the host of the battle. And the Lord of hosts is the Lord of Saba. Saba is a word for angelic army. And so he musters the host, the angelic army, because he's the Lord of those hosts. And just as the host of heaven and angels are called hosts and stars are part of the host, all the Old Testament words would suggest that these are angels in the time of the book of Revelation, and probably the ones mentioned as mighty angels in Revelations that would go back to the Icarus order versus the dunamis order. So I understand how it's easy to want to say that that's giants because of the mighty ones. But he's not going to use giants for his anger. That's the beginning of the end. That's the beginning of the time that's going to be culminated in the wrath of God. And so that's when the mighty show up from the throne of God. So I would say no to the giants as being loyal giants from heaven. So these will be angels that will be part of that. And we could also look at in Jeremiah 51 that there's also going to be a destroying angel that is going to be destroying Babylon. And it's one of the actual words in destroying in Jeremiah 51 is the Hebrew word abad, which is the word for Abaddon as it shows up for the destroyer angel in Revelation 9, or Apollyon in Greek. So there could be a mix of angels here, because as you move on, you have the angels that are permitting things to happen, and usually it's the fallen angels and the people on the earth that are carrying out these judgments. And then when you move on later on into this destruction of Babylon, it's not Armageddon, because Armageddon is still to follow as it describes. And Isaiah 34 will have kind of a cognate version for the same type of celebration that goes on by the fallen ones. But as you move on into it, you have in Isaiah 13:21, after the destruction of Babylon, you have the wild beasts of the deserts that are going to lie there. Wild beasts can be demonic spirits. They can be angelic beast spirits. But it says that their houses are going to be full of doleful creatures and owls. And as you get into doleful creatures and wild beasts, these are like howling angels, fallen angels like jackals and things like that. And owls, of course, could be connected to cherubim. And then you get into the satyrs, which are the degraded seraphim angels, as I like to think of them. And then you also have more of these wild beasts on the islands and the houses of the dragons, which are again seraphim. And it seems to me like you've got all of these angelic angels that are involved, that are fallen ones, as permitted by the mighty Icarus to do the destruction of Babylon, but not giants.
All right. Excellent answer, Gary. I wanted to give a congratulations. We were talking a little bit about baptism right before the break, and one of your followers, very excellent question asker, Daniel Sullivan, put on Facebook that he just got baptized, immersed this past week. So congratulations, Daniel, if you're listening. And also the next question is from Daniel Sullivan. He's asking, is the rapture before or after the destruction of Babylon? Is there a Bible verse that places the rapture after the destruction of Babylon?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. And congratulations, Daniel. And I think Daniel, he's probably still in the Philippines right now. So,
Yes.
happy baptismal day for you, and congratulations. So, yeah, the timing is for rapture is thought to be from a mid-trib perspective, which I tend to fall into, but from that line of thought would be before the mark of the beast, and that we're not going to be here for that, because even the elect will be deceived if that were possible, and it is. So we're promised that we're going to be saved in Revelation 3 from the time of temptation or the time of trial, because as the elect, the credentials and the events going on is going to make even the elect believe Antichrist might be the Messiah. And we're also promised to be saved from the wrath. We're not promised to be saved from tribulation. Two different words for wrath and tribulation. It says different words for this time of trial. So with that in mind, in Matthew 24:19, you have the word woe that's being used. And it's the same Greek word for the three woes that begins with the abyss being open in Revelation 9, the second woe after the fall of the two witnesses at the midpoint of the last 7 years by the one who comes up out of the abyss, which is going to permit Antichrist to come to power and be crowned in the temple. And so in this time frame of the woes, and Jesus is talking about this woe before he talks about the time of his sign after the abomination. And as I said, before the mark of the beast. And so we have a passage in Revelation 18:4, which is the destruction of Babylon in the details, which is really kind of important, I think, that you have a passage that says, come out of Babylon and do not receive her plagues. So just as in Matthew 24:7 to 15, we have this period of apostasy, as 2 Thessalonians 2 talks about, of the great falling away, the scandalizo, of when people are going to be offended or turned over by people within the church, and you're going to have a war within the church who are going to follow Babylon and its religion before Antichrist comes to power. And Christians are going to suffer persecution and martyrdom, which are the saints that are shown in Revelation 7. And so when we look at the blood of the saints that is on Babylon, as it's talked about also in Revelation 18, you start to see how all of these passages start to align. And when we look at after the gospel is preached by the angel, in Revelation 14:6, that's the last of the preaching of the gospel before the end comes that Jesus talks about in Matthew 24. And then Babylon is the next major event that follows, and then the mark of the beast. So Babylon falls before the mark of the beast. And that seems to be, we're called to come out before that destruction. And so it would happen sometime after the abomination, but before the mark of the beast, as Antichrist is coming to power. That's the time of the rapture. And I think coming out of Babylon would be the best sort of timing that we could have for that. And then it also matches up with Revelation 10:7 with the timing of the seventh trumpet, with it actually sounding at the time of the two witnesses being killed with the second woe. And that this is in Revelation 10:7, this is the time when the mystery of God is fulfilled, just as the rapture is part of that mystery of God. And it's a mystery, as Paul talks about, all words that work in perfect harmony for end time chronology. And in Revelation 12, at the time of the abomination, you get this is the time of woe as well. I think part of the third woe, because you have the fallen angels all cast down to the earth for the last 3.5 years at the start of Antichrist reign, and you have the people of Judah who are fleeing Jerusalem because of the abomination, as you match up Matthew 24 with Revelation 12, and that's the time of woe because Satan and all the fallen angels will be on earth for the last 3.5 years. And then you have the word woe or alas that's used in Babylon two times with 3 of each, and that's, I think, is part of that same third woe, all at the same basic period of time, but just before the mark of the beast.
All right. Excellent answer. Very detailed as usual. Thank you, Gary. Next question is from Brian Tucker. Is Gilgamesh actually Nimrod?
Well, a lot of people think that he is, and my answer is typically no, he is not. So Gilgamesh is 6th generation after the flood. He's the son of Lugabanda, king of Uruk, and a fertility mother goddess named Nin. And so Nimrod is 3rd generation. So typically they're kind of conflated together, but they're distinct. And so I would say no to that, and that we should try and stay away from conflating the two. We don't know actually what Nimrod looked like. You see Nimrod reliefs that are the same reliefs that are used for Gilgamesh, and that's seemingly how they're kind of joined together. And a fellow by the name of Smith, and I talk about him in book 1, and then I kind of clarify why I think he's wrong in book 2. He's kind of initially, I think, for the modern word, conflated Nimrod with Gilgamesh, and through the legends of Idzubar, which is another legend, which is the same telling of the story of Gilgamesh. So it's the same. It could be called Idzubar in one language and then Gilgamesh in another language, but it's the same legend, just as you have his name, the same legend written down in the Ugaritic text, but again, they're calling him Gilgamesh versus Idzubar. And so Smith equated Nimrod with Idzubar, which is Gilgamesh, and I think that's how it came together. But because of the generational differences, I think they're not the same, but Gilgamesh inherited one of the cities that Nimrod renewed. So there is a relationship, but they separate themselves by a couple of 100 years here. So, and I'm using biblical chronology on that in the new book and how we get there. So, you'd be looking at about, say, 2100 to 2200 BC, according to biblical chronology for Gilgamesh, and you've got Nimrod somewhere between 2300 to 2200. So just before that, maybe a little bit further back, born a little bit sooner, son of Cush. You could move him back to maybe to 2320 if you wanted, and still be kind of safe on that, versus the 26 to 2700 on secular chronology. But there's a difference of about 500 to 600 years. I like to use 600 because it fits better with all the inconsistencies that are worldwide that the secular people use for their chronology for the time of the flood, 2950 to 3050 versus 2348 using Amu Mundi of the Hebrews. So about 600 years on the 3050 mark. And that seems to, if you understand that so many kings had multiple names, just as angels had multiple names, the seculars, when they're trying to match up different countries to get their chronology, I think they've added in a number of dynasties that add up to about 600 years.
Yeah, I think that there's multiple names for this Nimrod character after the flood. One of them I think is Amraphel, or that might be possibly his son. As mentioned in like
Amraphel is quite a bit later than Nimrod, but more associated to Gilgamesh and Lugubanda in that sort of region. But Nimrod, does have different names as he's recorded in the Sumerian legends, but he's again associated before Gilgamesh. Okay. No, I wouldn't associate Nimrod with Amraphel.
Okay. And also too, I'm sure you've read this book, Gary, the one that was released from the Vatican several years ago, the Book of Og, where there was a Nimrod pre-flood as well. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
next, go
ahead. I was just going to say, I mean, we don't know whether that's a legitimate text or not. It supposedly comes out of the Vatican, and it's very interesting to read. And it's from the Manichaean Book of Giants, which was a merging of the Persian version of that legend or scripture and the Enochian Book of Giants. So the thing to keep in mind is that giants were have names before the flood that people are named after the flood with. So Gilgamesh, as I said, is 6th generation after the flood, but in Enoch Book of Giants, there's a Gilgamesh there that is around before the flood. So it's not uncommon to have giants and people named after giants before the flood. So if the Book of Og is legitimate ancient writings, then there could have been a Nimrod before the flood, and then Nimrod, son of Cush, either has his name changed to that because it's a foreign name anyways from a biblical perspective, and was named after a giant before the flood. It's like I say, and you could also look at Hercules being son of Zeus as being perhaps named after Hercules before the flood as well.
Yeah, and for those of you that haven't read Gary's first book, he has an entire chapter that Sherry put the link in the chat for everybody about this topic about Gilgamesh. And so I would refer everyone there for a ton of more information. I appreciate it, Gary. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so Enmerakar would be the Sumerian name for Nimrod. That was 3rd generation that built a tower like Babel at Eridu.
What was the name again, Gary?
Enmerakar, Enmerkar. And for people double checking, I use the Sumerian spelling, not the Akkadian.
Okay, oh, great. All right, next question is from Pamela Evans Shink. What is your opinion, and this is kind of a hot topic now, what is your opinion on the theory that the millennial reign already happened and we are in the little season?
There's a lot of approaches out there on scripture, and everybody is using scripture to make their case. I would test everybody's approach, mine as well, and how I come about getting my chronology on prophecy, and that look for red flags. If you have to change the meaning of words and passages, if you have to leave out inconvenient passages, if you have to reinvent what Jesus said, if you have to redefine what Jesus said by other prophets or writers, instead of putting everything around what Jesus said, I would suggest there's an issue with that approach. So we don't get anything in prophecy that there is a lost 200 or 300 years. And I know this is very common in the sort of Tartarian sort of aspect of things. But the thing is that we want to be careful in terms of how we're justifying our positions on this and how we get there. And then if you start building on a bad platform, you're getting further away. So we need to be, I would suggest that we be as disciplined as we can when we're talking about this. So this term, the little season, it comes out of the book of Revelation, when in chapter 20, when Satan is released for a little season. And this little season is expanded to somehow be hundreds of years. I've even heard in variations of this up to 1,000 years or maybe 2,000 years. But, is that what is really meant by the passage or by the words that are used in Revelation 20? And is there any other passages that we ought to be looking at that we can gain additional understanding to the meaning? And the answer is yes to both. And then we can look at how this little season is being translated. So it's in Revelation 23. And so little is the Greek word mikros. And season is the Greek word chronos. And so when we look at micros, it means a short time. So not a long period of time. And chronos also means a time. So we're not talking about 100 years. And the word season, if you understood it, and it can mean a season, that would be like 3 months. Now, if it was, part of a prophetic year, it might have a little bit different meaning, but it seems out of context that we would take that and expand something that means a short time and a short time again. So it's a short, doesn't mean the translation for micros would be short time in this application. You cut it off at short. And then you have season, which is chronos, which is a time, short time or little time, however you want to do that. Now, we actually do get another passage that is used in the book of Revelation, and it's in Revelation 6. And in Revelation 6, you have the first fruits that have been martyred for Jesus, and they've been told to wait for a little season for the rest of those who were martyred for the testimony of Jesus come out of the Great Tribulation, which is the first 3.5 years. The Greek word philipses that we talked about earlier. And then we have another period that is actually relative to the same sort of time frame. The wording is a little bit different, but it's also 3.5 years, but it's so similar, but I think it's used with different words just to denote it from the first 3.5 years. And that's in Revelation 7:10, when the 10 kings hand their power over to Antichrist to destroy Babylon, and becomes the power. And that term is a short space. And Antichrist's reign is 3.5 years. And so short and space, aren't the same words as micros and chronos. They're separate words, and I think they're used with separate Greek words, but just to distinguish it from the Great Tribulation, from the tribulation of the saints. So just as you have the tribulation of the saints, and those are the martyrs, you have the Great Tribulation that's not seen since the beginning of creation, which is the last 3.5 years, which is the end that Jesus is talking about. I think the words are used there to denote it, but both times it's 3.5 years. And so we don't get it described in different sort of manners where you could take this little season anywhere else. So when we look at it as the applications of either 3 months or 3.5 years as a little season, then as it's used for a short period of time, and it's demonstrated this way also in Acts 8:11, 14:3, 28, that's 14:28, and 2 Peter 2:3, you have similar applications of the Greek words all going for a very short period of time. And then the other word you can't ignore that you have to factor in to the chronology of the book of Revelations is the word and. And that's the Greek word kahi. And so just as it says, and there are 7 kings, or and the beast that was and that was not, it also is used as and to introduce another set of events, as it's introducing the next set of details in other applications. So as you move into Revelation 20, it begins with and. It's the Greek word kahi. And all the events listed in order in Revelation 19 have and kahi. And it's like the Greek word toda that Jesus uses in his chronology, but this has a little bit more additional sort of meaning. It's the when, and then as also as well as the meaning can be translated as. And is used all the way through Revelation 20. So, and you saw the angel, and he laid on the dragon, and he cast him into the bottomless pit, and he saw thrones where those who didn't receive the mark were ruled, and then when the 1,000 years were loosed, Satan was set free. It's giving you your chronology, and so it didn't take the fallen angels and Satan hundreds of years to round up the armies at the time of Armageddon, as talked about in gathering them in Revelation 16. It happened within a year. It's wouldn't take Satan hundreds of years to gather this army to go on Jerusalem. Every detail as you peel back goes against that understanding that we've lost our memories, they've changed the history, we're living in that little season for hundreds of years. I know my parents and my genealogies, we go way back beyond that. That's not made up. And there's no evidence within my family line that any, their ancestors are made up. So I would, I have personal knowledge, and I have the how the words are used in the Bible to say that's, people can discern prophecy any way that they want, but for me it has too many issues to go down that road where we're at the end of the millennium and we're in this 100-year unprophesied state. And the other thing is in Daniel is that as you get the weeks of the years, all the prophecy is fulfilled then. So if there was prophecy that's been lost, that wouldn't make any sense. And so what's talked about the prophecy that's already provided was provided in that age of the weeks, and there's a period within the 1,000 years yet to be fulfilled, but there's no other prophecy in there to relate to this lost period of time. So there's just, as I say, it's a very seductive eschatological approach. I don't go for it because it has so many contradictions with other prophecy narratives. It just doesn't sort of fit. And you can say, well, all of that happened, but there's no reference to that we have that we can look to scriptural that we can say that there is this sort of lost period of time, and it's just not anywhere there. So, after the 1,000 years are expired, Satan's released, and then he goes out to the nations, to the four corners. It's immediate. to gather the armies. And they went upon the breadth of the earth and came and set up their camp outside of Jerusalem, and then they were destroyed. And then the devil was cast into the lake of fire. These are all bang, 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 bang. And you see the great white throne, and the dead and small stand before him, and we move into the resurrection of the dead. It's just so sequential, so right after. There's really nothing in there that you could say there's this extra millennium, or 2,000 years, or 400 years, whatever that period is being used. And I've heard all sorts of different versions of that I can look in there and say, yeah, it's there. It's just not.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you so much, Gary. I like when you break down the words and you give us the original language of the Greek and the Hebrew. And when you said kahi in Greek means and, in Hawaiian it actually means crazy. So totally different meanings, but the same word. It's kind of funny to look at different languages. We have psychological establishments here named Kahi Mohala, for example. So anyway, I was going to ask you, Gary, we had a question come in from your host, from Zen and Justin. I was wondering, would you want to answer that without, I mean, it's pretty much right down your alley. You speak about this in your first book. I think I'll interject that since they're listening right now. And this is from Zen and Justin. Did Adam have knowledge of the 7 sacred sciences, and was the order of Melchizedek a guardian of that knowledge until the fallen angels came and taught them to be godless humans?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. So biblically, we're not told Adam had knowledge of the 7 sacred sciences. That comes from the Polychronicon and Masonic history or legends. But it's not unfounded either biblically, that there is a premise that the Masons could have built on this. And in their premise is that Adam was taught significant knowledge while in Eden. And he would have needed significant knowledge in Eden to run this massive garden. This was from the Nile to the Euphrates, from Mount Hermon to the Pacific Ocean. It's the same land that Abraham was promised in Genesis 15. So he would have had been taught all sorts of things to raise crops, as you take the language back to Hebrew in Genesis 2, to raise orchards, to herd domesticated animals, and to govern this massive area. He may have even had technology that he used. We're not told how he manages this. The only thing that we're told is that it's so large, God felt he needed a partner and created Eve. So now you have his work in half because, it's such a small area. So there's an inference of a lot of knowledge that he would have had. He would have had to have at least knowledge of astronomy. And as Josephus said, that, the Adamites were avid developers and studiers of astronomy because they needed it, because they're agrarian people. And so that's part of those 7 disciplines that Enoch, son of Cain, separated this knowledge that Adam learned in Eden. And so down through the Sethites before the flood, and then Noah after the flood, whatever knowledge that was passed on by Adam to his line would have been with the Noahites after the flood. And one presumes down through Shem and down through Abraham to a certain degree that would have passed on some of this knowledge. And so the Melchizedek order may or may not have been an order at that time. And there could have been a group of priests that were, called the Melchizedek order to keep that knowledge. It's certainly a possibility, because we do have a Melchizedek or a Melchizedek, however you want to pronounce that, as a compounded word or as a singular name. But I also think Melchizedek might be the pre-existent Jesus. So, and if that's the case, then that's all of the knowledge within that whole order, or a lot of that knowledge, and that Melchizedek doesn't have a genealogy, no mother nor father, as the book of Hebrews describes him. And it would be appropriate that Jehovah, the one who would become the Word of God, and in flesh to become Jesus, would be the one to bless Abraham, who's going to be the father of the nation, to produce the tribe of the nation of Israel, to produce the tribe of Judah, to produce King David, to produce the genealogy that would produce Mary, who could have an oikotarian created in the Holy Spirit for him, for the Word to become flesh. Everything's sort of in perfection there. So the simple answer is I think Adam had that knowledge, however broad that knowledge was. He used it without rituals, without corruption, and whereas the Cainite line took that knowledge because Adam taught that knowledge to Cain and to Seth, and the Cainites perverted that knowledge and mixed it with the worship of fallen angels, which is Enochian mysticism, and the sun worship and the bull cult. That was the main proponents of the antediluvian religion that was passed on to Nimrod at Babel. So I think for the most part, yeah, Adam had probably all of that knowledge that they talk about.
All right. Thank you so much, Gary. I think we have time. Let's see. We have about 13 minutes left before the end. Before I ask the next question, for those who are just coming into the chat and just listening to the program here, Gary, you could share some information about your second book, where to order it, how to reach you if they have questions, or if they are requesting your manuscripts from you. Maybe you could share that now before I ask the last question, in case we run out of time.
Yeah, if you want to get a signed book or find out more about my books, go to my website. I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book 1, all 84 chapters of book 2. If you want to get some information, go to contact the author. If you want to get a signed copy from me off my website, just go to book 1, buy now, or book 2, buy now, and that'll take you to buy a signed copy. If you're in the US, go to the US page. There's a Canada page if you live there, and anywhere else in the world, there's an international page. So that's the easiest way to get a hold of me or my book, is through my website, thegenesis6conspiracy.com with the number 6.
Great. Thank you, Gary. Okay, next question is from Brian Tucker. Did the tribe of Zebulun do something wrong?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what Brian is asking there. The only two things, from my knowledge, that I could attribute to Zebulun doing wrong, and I'm not sure why he's suggesting that they did. Certainly they're represented in Revelation 7:8 with the tribes versus Dan that's not, which would be a significant thing, that why Dan isn't there. But the two things that I found is Judges 1:30, like Ephraim and Manasseh, Zebulun did not drive out all of the other tribes, and they became a snare for them and for Israel. And then they seem to be also part of, well, they were as part of the sons, Zebulun, as part of, making Joseph disappear. And they didn't kill him, but they faked his death and told their father that Joseph was dead. So that's in Genesis 37. So those would be the only two things that I could find that if Zebulun did something wrong. There's a passage in Numbers 25:9, and it seems to correlate with 1 Corinthians 10:8, where there was this great plague that killed over 20,000 people, and it comes about because of Israel worshiping other gods, and they didn't chase all the nations out. And certainly Zebulun was connected in Judges 1:30 for not taking the nations out. So that's about all I could figure out on that. So I'm not sure what Brian is getting at, but maybe on the next show we could hear from him and he could ask why he was wanting to know whether or not Zebulun did something wrong, and is there more to the question.
Okay, great. I think that's a good idea too. I think we have a time for another question here from The World is the Theater. Are you familiar with Lawrence Gaudner, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, blending the serpent Messiah from the bloodline of Cain and their starfire blood rituals, the Holy Grail being Anunnaki dragon blood?
Yeah, so I talk about and quote Lawrence Gardner quite a bit in book 1. A little bit I use him in book 2, so very familiar with his work. And yes, they do show Cain and Enoch as being the two major proponents, and as it comes down through Lamech and Tubal-Cain, as this bloodline that intermarries with female angels and vice versa with Anunnaki, with women like Nama, to create these dragon bloodlines that in his genealogies of the royals survived the flood, crossed the flood, and that the royals trace their bloodlines back to that Anunnaki dragon bloodline. So that's a lot of what book 1 is about for sure. That's what they record. I'm not a proponent of those bloodlines surviving. I think there's bloodlines from giants after the flood that they trace their bloodlines back, but the occult believes differently and the royals believe differently.
Okay, maybe we should try one more question here from Brian Tucker again. Is the Sphinx a lion man?
Yeah, I mean, you could look at that as being a lion or a human. And what's interesting is the Sphinx is called Aker in Egyptian, transliterated English Aker, which means watcher. And the Sphinx was also called, Tep-Awi, which means lion. And so Sphinx is understood as a lion in Egyptian hieroglyphs, and there's used lions for the hieroglyphs for the Sphinx is a lion. And so I think it could have been a lion face, but it would be one face of a cherubim. So it could have just as easily been a human face, as that's also part that's used for a cherub, or an ox or a bull, or this a gargoyle or bird type face that's used on cherubs in the further east into Syria and places like that.
All right, maybe we can squeeze another question in here. From The World is a Theater, are the 10 kings from the serpent Pendragon bloodlines the sons of Cain or Enlil Anunnaki bloodlines?
According to Gardner, both. And that would be the Grail kings before the flood, or the 10 kings from the Larsa kings list, would be all the same sort of kings that are being referenced there. So according to occult genealogists, the answer would be yes and it's both Cain through Enoch through his line, plus the intermarriage of the Anunnaki watchers.
Okay, great. Thank you, Gary. Another question from Tree Frog. Could you talk about the Northern Lights? Are they real or fake? And why are the powers trying to duplicate them?
They're trying to duplicate them to create interference from the interaction with the sun and the magnetism in there that does harm to the satellites. That's what they say they're doing. At least that's the superficial story. I would suggest they're doing it for other reasons. I don't know what, but the Northern Lights are real. I'm from Canada. I grew up watching the Northern Lights. I'm up in Northern Canada now, and even in the summer we can see them at times. So it's quite a regular phenomena up there, and yes, they're real.
Okay, maybe we can get another one in here. The World is a Theater is asking, what about children who receive the mark of the beast? Where are their names written?
Well, all the names are written in the Book of Life that was written in from before creation, and everybody will have a chance whose names are written in the Book of Life to have their name blotted out or not. So even the people that take the mark of the beast, it is written in the Book of Life, but once they take that mark, it is gone. Now you can have your name erased from the book of life in any generation, but specifically that's where their names are written, just as all of our names are written, and we have a choice to leave it in there or not.
Okay. Another quick question from Will Graham. Who created the dinosaurs?
I think that's a modification of creation because of the giantism and the reptilian nature to it of the Watcher Seraphim, and whether or not they were created somewhere before Genesis 1, 2, or they're there before the flood, or both. Because they're reptilian and they have feathers, as we're seeing more of them, I think they would have been created after the narcissism of the fallen seraphim watcher angels.
Oh yeah, similar to the unicorns and all those other little DNA combination creatures, right?
Yep.
All right,
Yes.
let's see if we could squeeze this in. We have 2 minutes left. From SW and a bunch of numbers. Do you believe we can land on the moon?
Yeah, I think we can. Doesn't matter to me what your belief system is, whether or not we live in a dome, on a flat earth, or on a globe. What we're told biblically is that the sun and the moon and the planets between the sun and the earth are in the firmament. So that's the first heaven. So if it's in the first heaven and it's inside the firmament, there's no reason why we couldn't land there. Whether or not we did or not, that's a different argument.
Okay. From RS Nickelbine, what do you think is the seal of God?
I think the seal of God is probably similar to what the 144,000 receive. They receive a seal of God. When we have our faith in God, that's our seal of God. Our faith in Jesus, that's our seal of God and the Holy Spirit. And it probably is something because he would protect us and we're part of his creation. I think it would have El Elion's name, whatever that name is that we probably couldn't spell or understand anyways.
All right. I think we're going to end here, Gary. The music will probably come on any moment here, but we just wanted to thank you so much for giving us your time, Gary, and hanging out with us here and answering all these questions. Really appreciate our moderators and my niece Tree Frog is taking questions. You guys have an awesome week. We'll be collecting your questions for next month, and blessings to everyone. Thank you. Shalom.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.
Did you ever feel that things were not quite right? That everything was just ever so slightly askew?
Do you have, to paraphrase Morpheus, a splinter in your mind?
If you're interested in hearing the latest information about UFOs, the paranormal,
Ancient cultures and structures,
monatomic elements,
longevity,
fantastic discoveries in science,
downloaded to your brain,
then tune into us. Hi, I'm Dave.
and I'm Mackie.
And we are Shiny Side Out, Sundays 2 to 4 a.m. Eastern. See you then.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
This is Thomas, a.k.a. a Mad Painter. I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom.
The future is uncertain, I know this. Death is inevitable, I know this. But one thing is certain, as free men, it is our right to live unencumbered and in peace. And those times are quickly drawing to an end. And in these times, peace is certainly an illusion, and if the chains grow tighter, our ability to slip those chains increase incrementally with every passing moment. Inaction is no longer an option. It's time to raise our voices like a cacophony of thunder and lightning and tell the masters no more. This is Nighthawk, and I say, for myself, no more. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, because the freedom is slipping away.
For joining the video and this broadcast. We appreciate all of you and thank you for your patronage. Please do like and subscribe and share with your friends. God bless all of you in your seeking.